And welcome back to Stories from the River, the World Business Forum series. Here we're recapping WBF NYC 2023. I'm joined today for this episode on Marshall Goldsmith with Manny Rodrigues and Brian Declinick, two return guests to the pod. Welcome back, Manny and Brian.
Charlie, thanks for having us. This is some new setup you have here. It's very comfortable, very comfortable. Brian, I'm happy to be sharing this podcast episode with you today.
Absolutely. Same here.
Welcome to Stories from the River, a show in which we go behind the scenes at Broad River Retail.
Okay, so Marshall Goldsmith, this is one of the top 50 coaches, and he's been ranked as a top coach. He's one of the prominent keynote speakers who spoke at World Business Forum, and so I've not seen him speak at World Business Forum, but I've heard him do a virtual masterclass at WOBE before, and heard him do some other podcasts. He's written dozens and dozens of books and bestsellers, and he opened up talking about the Marshall bot, and I think this past Saturday he did a webinar on the Marshall bot. I think I missed it. But anyways, so if you want to know more about Marshall, he's created one of the only people who's created his own AI bot, which is interesting. Then he went into telling us where he lives, which he has some great neighbors, like Keith Urban and Nicole Kidman and Taylor Swift, which I thought was
I mean, he's in Nashville, and so there's a lot of celebrities that are there in Nashville, and Marshall's the latest one.
There you go. Okay, well, to start off, just give me your overall take. Manny, we'll start with you on just the Marshall Goldsmith talk.
Yeah. Marshall did a really, really nice job. He was one of my favorite speakers because I think he did a really good job of connecting and really just humanizing kind of the message. He was the only speaker there at WOBE, the World Business Forum in New York, that really had us kind of get up and walk around. And I know we'll talk more about kind of the questions he asked us. But it was a really lighthearted, but filled with really practical things that we can use every day that really point to kind of how can we be the better versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
So I thought he did a really nice job.
That's great. Thanks, Manny. And Brian?
So I'll have to disagree with Manny. I did not love getting up and walking around as an extreme introvert. Going up and introducing myself to people is not in my comfort zone.
It was noticeable.
That's okay. To get me out of my comfort zone, it's probably a good thing for me. But no, I agree with Manny. Always love listening to Marshall Goldsmith. A lot of great nuggets there. A lot of great wisdom over obviously years and years of learning and studying, and fortunate that he's willing to pass it on to us.
Yeah. Well, okay. Before we get into like the getting up and interacting with others exercise, what was the first message he was trying to land? I mean, one note I have here is what to stop, and I have this note, winning too much. And he talks about this case study number 1, Restaurant Y, and just quote unquote, shut up and enjoy the food. And then yes, and to ideas of coworkers to add value. And then as you rise, you have to be cognizant of your orders, your suggestions become orders. And so, but I've got a few more notes here, but what were some of your takeaways? Manny, we'll start with you on just how he started, his first point he was trying to land.
Yeah. They're always looking to get responses and kind of, spark some of the thoughts in your head. So when you hear you're winning too much, like, okay, well, winning too much. I thought that was the goal was to be winning. And so I think what he was trying to get across to us was to not get set in a way where you're reading your own press clippings, but also that you're remembering what got you there, like remembering that it is a collective force and that the and is so much more powerful than the but. I think sometimes, and I think we'll get to this here in a bit as well, is we, because of success, we might be, it's what you put off to others and how they receive it. And so I thought I did a nice job of just kind of keeping it simple and remembering that it's the collaborative, empathetic approach that really, really helps kind of move things along.
Yeah, that's great. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, so he was talking about the classic challenges of the successful leader. I think you listed a couple. One that really resonated with me was trying to add too much value. All right, so I'm guilty of this all the time, right? So one of the things I'm trying to improve myself on now is allowing other people to fail, right? Like, not that I'm trying to prove how smart I am or that I know more than someone, but I just, trying to be helpful, right? But by not allowing other people to fail, I'm not allowing them to learn and grow from their mistakes, right? So by me trying to add that value is robbing them of that opportunity to learn and grow. So that one really, really hit home with me.
Yeah, he was all about just kind of like, breathe. And he just kept doing this. Before I speak, breathe and ask myself, is it worth it? Is it worth it? And win the big ones and forget about all the others. Yep. So in other words, just pick and choose your battles, right? He said his 4 words, he said, help more, judge less.
Yes.
So I thought that was really great. And just to continue, like his first point he tried to land, some of my takeaways were, for the great achiever, who's it about? It's all about me. Yep. For the great leader, who's it about? It's all about them.
Yep.
And he said the worst thing that you can say as a leader is, this is great, but, and then you interject why it's not great, right?
Guilty.
Yeah. I think guilty as a parent, as a dad, and as a leader, but he said the leader of the future will know how to ask, which I thought, that's a pretty profound statement. The leader of the future will know how to ask. And so he really just tried to discern it to, like, don't try to do it all. Just pick one thing. Get better at one thing. I wrote down my one thing here, but those are some of my takeaways from how he started.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think those are all good ones. I think Brian made a good point there. It's, I think we have to discern those opportunities to not overpower, override someone who's learning and who's showing a desire to learn. And so I think sometimes letting them kind of go through the process and then ultimately, being there for them when it doesn't go the way that they had hoped. And so Marshall did a really nice job of also not only talking about it from a business sense, but also in a personal sense. He gave a lot of stories, a couple of examples where he was in the car with his wife and he was just like, is it worth it? He's like, no, so let them breathe. And so again, it's just good reminders to, listen more and then ask yourself those questions before responding to it and reacting to it.
I know I could benefit from asking myself, is it worth it when I'm talking to my wife?
Yeah. Guilty.
Yes.
Well, and to that point I think he gave as much advice for like just life lessons as he did for business lessons. Right. He said one of the things he implemented early on was to spend 4 hours or more with his family. Was that per week, with his children per week?
Yes. Yeah. Cumulative for the year. He had even a bigger number that increased.
Right. Yeah. I think it started maybe at 50 hours and 80 hours and 120 hours. And to the point that when they got older, they're like, Dad, that's enough. We
go back to work.
Yeah. Please go do something else. But I think like measuring yourself by like time spent. Okay. If I think that time spent with my kids is important, especially while they're young, I'm going to measure myself. So he dropped these little nuggets about how he lived and what worked well for him along the way as he was giving kind of his life advice. Manny, you talked about this quote we were talking off before we started recording. It was like, what can I do to be a better son or daughter? Yeah. And to ask your mom or dad about that. And so you just went and saw your parents after WOBI, after World Business Forum.
Yeah, I did. My mom and dad are from Rhode Island. And so quick little trip up to see my sisters and see my mom and dad. And it was, he gave, so I don't know if you guys remember you guys have your pages and pages of notes here. I'm sure you have it in there. He gave the story about the leader that worked for a large company, but who in conversations with their mom, I think the mom said, hey, that walk out to the mailbox, and what I grabbed in the mailbox and, proceeded to tell her daughter or son how the notes and so the notes that she would receive on occasion meant so much to her. And so at that point, that daughter, son, I can't recall, made a personal decision, a commitment to write her daily notes. And like, what a beautiful thing, knowing that, hey, every morning, your mom and dad's like, with the joy that they have, knowing that they're going to read, a note written, but that you took the time to write for them. Like, that really left a good, I was like, well, it goes back to what Marshall did a nice job of showing us and telling us how we can be more intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked my mom and dad, I was like, well, and again, okay, we don't have a long enough podcast here, but what was I expecting them to say? Probably not anything so profound, because they're so excited about our family and kind of and our boys and Gray and everything, but they love hearing from us. I mean, my mom quickly walked me to the 2 recent pictures that were sent up, and the little note that James put with the pictures of him and his soccer team and John Wallace from his class. Like that, I mean, there was nothing more important to my mom at that point than showing us, like, this, look right here, like the centerpiece. And so I think a really good executive coach like Marshall, who does this for a living, he's done it for the top leaders, top companies. He really just knows how to humanize it and bring it down to a point where it's really kind of, how are you choosing to plan and intentionally live out these parts of your life? And so, yeah, I love that question, because you can very practically take it and then go apply some things to it.
Yeah, it's very convicting.
Yeah,
Convicting story. And
really
I think
is.
his latest book is The Earned Life.
The Earned Life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about self-mastery, and he always starts with the Socratic approach, asking a good question to make you reflect. And he said, why should I be entrusted to lead anyone else if I can't trust myself? And so I think that's a great like, you got to be able to lead yourself. I mean, that, as opposed to just saying lead yourself. Well, he asks it presents it in a question. Why should be entrusted to lead someone else? And I liked this thing he talked about, the checklist manifesto. We're all about checklists, right? And he said there's a Harvard author who talked about the diseases that went down, that when they doctors started washing their hands. Mm-hmm. And so they started asking them, before they were afraid to ask the doctors, did you wash your hands? Yeah. And then they started asking them, did you wash your hands? And all these diseases from hand-borne like illnesses just kind of eradicated, went away when they started washing their hands. It's a great little, we talk about pilots go through on airplanes checklists, and we even have checklists for different events, right? Mm-hmm. So following a checklist is not a bad thing. It's a great kind of self-mastery checklist manifesto. Brian, I'll turn it over to you for any other nuggets you've got.
Yeah, so first, I love that checklist, right? Asking yourself that daily question, mm-hmm. How many times did I try to correct someone today? How many times did I, and then keeping score every day and at the end of the week, and then you can compare week to week, month to month, year to year, and track your improvement. So I think that was probably the best takeaway from his talk. Something I'm definitely going to put into practice here in the future.
Yeah. So he the daily question process. He had these questions, 2 columns. On one column, how many times did I try to prove I was right? And you could put other questions, and you give yourself a 0 or 1. How many times did I talk about others? If you're trying not to talk about others, 0 or 1. And then if you're trying to exercise, how many steps did you do? How many push-ups? How many minutes did you, whatever. And it's a 0 or 1. And so it's just a daily, and I've heard him speak about that before, but it was another great reminder, because I've not implemented that exact daily process. And then you just measure yourself. So it's a great one about asking yourself questions. I want to go back to another one. He said, talking about, he talked a lot about looking ahead and forgetting or forgiving the past. This is one I am my own worst critic, and I have a hard time forgiving myself on mistakes. But he said, and so this really resonated with me, ask for ideas for the future, not for the past, because you can't change the past. You can only get better in the future. And sometimes I like to go back to the past and keep beating myself up about it. But he said, people can change. The key to making change last is you have to follow up and stick with it. And then he referenced a book called Leadership is a Contact Sport. Is there anything you guys want to add about the future versus past? Otherwise, I'll get more into the Q&A part.
Well, I think part of planning for the future, and part of what Marshall kind of the exercises that the Q&A part that he made us go through is putting it into practice. Mm-hmm. Like the checklist is a tool or an example of getting something started. And some folks operate well with the checklist. I love a good checklist, because the thing with the checklist is it gives you a score at the end of the day, and as long as you take the pressure off that, like, hey, perfect perfect doesn't exist. It's not going to be there, but you know, it does progress,
Mm-hmm.
progress and moving it forward. And so, so yeah, I love the checklist part. And I think, you know, also understanding that it is how we choose to kind of make things better, rather than kind of, you know, harboring and, you know, and spending too much time looking back.
Yeah. Yeah. He had this whole piece on active questions versus passive questions.
Yeah.
And, you know, to ask yourself these active questions. Did I do my best to set clear goals, make progress toward goal achievement, to be happy, to find meaning, to build positive relationships, to be fully engaged? So again, self-reflective questions leading into self-mastery, holding yourself accountable. Yeah, he had us get up and do this exercise. So what was the exercise? We had to get up and meet other people. Brian hated it, but it was but he did it. We all participated. So we had to go sit next to somebody who we didn't know. So that was the first part. And then what were the questions we had to go out?
Yeah. Well, the first thing was he wanted to make sure that we were all sitting next to folks and there's a lot of guilty parties and, you know, folks sitting next to all their colleagues. He's like, well, that's the first problem. He's like, go get uncomfortable, go meet someone and tell them about something that you are working on and ask them for advice. Ask them to give you some examples of how you can, you know, get better at that. And so we started doing that. And I know Brian got a lot out of that portion. So Brian, who'd you talk to?
Yeah. So the question I asked, I think I actually spoke one of your Icelandic
nice.
friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question I asked was kind of what I alluded to before is, you know, how do I get better at letting people fail, right? And you know, because again, it comes from good intentions, but you know, road to hell's paved in good intentions, right? You know, the feedback I got was like, you know, you just think about it yourself, right? Like, how do you learn? How do you grow? I'm like, well, I grow by learning from my mistakes. And like, well, if you're not learning to make mistakes, how do they grow and learn, right?
Yeah.
So that was the conversation that I had with one of your pals there.
Very nice.
Do you remember the question you asked?
Yeah. I asked him. So, you know, decking more time to more intentional time. How do they structure their time, their meetings? You know, what are some good best practices? And I got some really good practical advice from them. Here was, you know, I don't know if you felt this, but after having done that, I was sitting there and I was like, wonder why he had. I mean, this is kind of interesting to get thousands of people to stand up and kind of move around. But I was like, you know what? You know what's interesting about that is you could kind of get vulnerable as long as you kind of get past you know, it's kind of weird to talk to someone you don't know, which sure, but you can kind of be honest and vulnerable because chances are you're probably never going to see that person again, unless you see him next year again at Woby. And so, like we spend a lot of time together, right, in the office on calls, and so it's probably the setting. It's kind of a little bit like freeing to be like, okay, here's what I'm really struggling with. Like, what do you think? And so I don't know if you got that, like, how did you feel kind of opening up and asking them those questions?
Well, so it was like speed coaching with each other.
That's right.
And so each person had to ask the other a question about one thing they needed help with. And then the goal was to see who could speak with the most people. I got 4 people. Yeah, someone got like 6, or they said they got 6. So they got a free signed copy of his book. I didn't find any inhibitions from myself or from others asking me questions, you know, and whatever the purpose behind it was, you know, just like to allow yourself to get comfortable with getting feedback and sharing feedback and recognizing people generally want to help others and to not be concerned about sharing one thing that you're working on. And there were other exercises that we didn't move around with, but to your partners you were working with, he had us like just kind of share different things throughout. So it was a very interactive session, which kind of kept you engaged a little bit for like a 60-minute, 90-minute talk, what have you. You know, I also like the question, he had you give yourself advice, but it was your future self. And so he said, and this is how I wrote it, it may not be exactly like he said it, but what would a 95-year-old version of me, maybe he said give to today's version, I just put to a 48-year-old version of me. And, you know, and he said, you'd probably say this, at least this is what I wrote down. I think he said, you'd probably say, be happy now. Don't wait till I guess he's talking about like big regrets people have at their older age. Like, don't wait till you're 90 to start being happy. Be happy now. Focus on your friends and family and go for whatever your big dream is. And so I think it's a good question to ask yourself. What would a 95-year-old version of me tell me or give? What advice would that person give to me? And so, his other things that he said were, life is short, have fun, do whatever you can to help people, go for it, and quit worrying about what he's not going to change. And his goal for today was to share something to help people have a little bit better life, just a little bit better life. That was his goal for today. What other takeaways did you have from Marshall, Brian?
Yeah, so one of the last things I have here, appreciate the things you have instead of focusing on the things you don't have,
Yeah.
which is something I preach to my kids, I think daily, but certainly I can also apply to myself as well.
Yeah, it's a power of gratitude and being, there's so much we have to be thankful for if we just focus on that versus what we don't have, especially as we go into the holiday season and can look at a lot of people who don't have things.
Do y'all remember he had a little bit of a back and forth with someone kind of close to the stage when he was asking us about, like, who are we trying to change? Why?
Yeah, the person's husband.
The person,
Yeah.
and not only, like, so she was, raising her hand. I'm trying to change. For how long? 14 years. Has he changed? Nope. He's like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then they asked about our in-laws, like, who's trying to change your in-laws? And hands went up, and it was interesting. Like, he came back to the point. He's like, you're spending so much time and energy trying to change things that, you know what, they're probably not going to change.
Probably not.
But why not, like, embrace, like, love them for who they are, and then, like, allow that to, like, there's so much more. So I think the message around not just being content, but just, like, loving that part of them.
Yeah, I think you get the sense that he's got advice he wants to share. He doesn't have to work, but he's living in his purpose.
Correct.
He enjoys what he's doing, and he honestly, genuinely wants to help other people live a better life and just kind of relax, be less stressed, and generally be happier day in, day out. But there's certain things you can do to kind of hold yourself accountable.
That's right.
To making sure that you don't have regrets, like you're spending time with your kids and you're not trying to change people for decades and years if they're not going to change, and to accept them for who they are. And also one that, I'm working on, accept yourself as you are, and things that you can't change. So that was Marshall Goldsmith. I think we'll let that one sit right there. That's a great recap. Thank you, Manny. Thank you, Brian. Thanks for joining us on the World Business Forum New York City recap series here at Stories from the River. We took our leaders to New York City for 3 days, Power Pack Days, a 2-day event. And this was our second year to take our leadership team there. And we wanted to just kind of spend some time recapping, again, behind the scenes here at Stories from the River. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Stories from the River. To check out more episodes, visit storiesfromtheriver.com. Join us again next week, and remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast.